Texas, like every state in America, has a suicide hotline, but the suicide hotline actually has a problem itself, which we're gonna describe. It's a 988 number, it's federally mandated. It's a state-run service that connects callers to crisis counselors, and it's supposed to fill in some of the gaps in obviously America's really poor approach to mental health and making sure that people have the resources they need. In the darkest moments, this is supposed to be available to you. Now, that hotline has been used thousands of times in just the last 2 years in Texas. So very, very popular, needed service. But its federal funding is declining, and there's in the state a workforce shortage. And so the system is starting to kind of fall apart at the seams. Since launching, back in 2022, it's received more than 380,000 calls. That's the second highest call volume of any state in America. 1/3 of them occurred between January to June of just this year. So it's becoming more popular over time. It's election year, maybe that plays into it too. And as a comparison, Texas, which has the second highest call volume, has 5 centers that are handling the calls. Florida, a smaller state, has 13. So a lot more resources being given over to answering those calls. And currently, less than 85% of calls in Texas are actually answered in state. There's 200 other centers around the nation that serve as a sort of backup that you can route callers to if needed. Now, the 85% you just saw is an improvement from the just 40% that were answered in state back in 2021. But it does still fall short of the 90% standard that the administrator of the program calls for. And here's the thing, it might seem like, well, whatever, they've got call centers out of state. No, that requires additional routing and additional time. And every one of those little bumps on the road is an opportunity to potentially lose someone that definitely needs your help. And so when you are transferring callers in and out of state, it's more likely that they will actually hang up on the crisis counselor. And in a crisis, that could be really important. Apparently, between January and August, over 18,000 calls were abandoned. Now, not all of them would be abandoned for this particular reason, but it's certainly a contributing factor. And bear in mind, in Texas, the suicide rate there has jumped 37% in the last 2 decades. So a serious and growing issue. Basically, in Texas, there's just not enough resources to improve the system and to make sure that everyone has access to it that needs it. Workers on staff take a lot of calls, nearly 100 on average in a day, potentially. They have just 15 minutes on average to help someone through an incredibly difficult time. And that's just for the calls. There's supposed to be other resources, but to fully implement text and chat components into this, they would need to at least double the number of crisis counselors they have. They'd need an additional $7 million, but the state isn't allocating nearly enough money. Now, 2 years ago, the Texas Health and Human Services Commission recommended more resources, but in the last legislative session, they didn't even consider it, let alone actually provide those resources. Now, supposedly they're gonna consider it this year. It would be relatively easy to fill that gap and make sure that Texans who are in desperate need of assistance can actually get it and that their calls aren't dropped when they need help the most. But now the onus is on Texas state government to make sure that those resources are made available. And Jackson, I wanted your thoughts on this.
I think that these types of services are critical, especially given the fact that people's reasons for being depressed and down and out are increasing. What was it, like 200,000 extra people were homeless in 2024? The number was like 500,000 out, 700 something thousand. The pricing of rent and mortgages continues to go up. Wages aren't keeping up with things. High skilled jobs are more and more out of reach, especially like when we got this oligarchy stuff going on to where that's becoming more of an issue. People are feeling hopeless. And I think that, in a time where the world is changing and much of the rest of the world is coming up, whether it's European countries, South American countries, are doing better than they have since the end of World War II. Like I said before, we're not the only big kids on the block. I think that our leaders need a lot more empathy for the public, but also at the end of the day, I always say that things like this come back to us. A lot of this can be solved through city council, through local government. More of our big issues can be solved through there. So I think it's important for us to mobilize and put better people in positions to where things like this can get funded, because all of this costs money. But it's definitely sad to see that people aren't able to get the help that they do need. I mean, I've had drug addiction issues. I've been suicidal in my life, so I can relate to people just in terms of the despair and how that feels. So, I
Yeah.
think that this is an important issue, especially for the left, to really keep on the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully get them to prioritize it. When you click the join button and become a tier 2 member, you get access to all of our weekly top 10 lists. What are you waiting for?